You are listening to the Call to Action podcast, where we aim to inspire, educate, and inform entrepreneurs and self-starters on tech and tips related to navigating this ever-changing world. Thank you for tuning in to episode 17 of the Call to Action podcast. And today we have a special guest for our Fireside chat, and his name is Matthew John Benecke. Matthew John Benecke is a speculative fiction writer originally from Brooklyn, New York. His interests outside of writing include playing and writing music on guitar and piano, photography, and photo editing. With his wife, Heather, he has traveled to all 50 United States and their capitals, as well as nearly a dozen Canadian provinces. Listen in as Matthew shares what inspires him, as well as some advice for aspiring authors on the Fireside Chat on the Call to Action podcast. Thank you for tuning in to episode 17 of the Call to Action podcast. I am your host, Shantae, and today we are having a fireside chat with speculative fiction writer Matthew John Benecke. And before we bring our guest on the show, I would like to share today's motivational quote. And here is today's motivational quote for episode 17 of the Call to Action podcast. Just when the caterpillar thought the world was ending, he turned into a butterfly. So I hope you all found that inspiring. And when things get tough, just remember that it's not really ending. You're turning into something new and more beautiful, just like the butterfly. Please join me in welcoming our guest, the author of the Cosmogonia series, Matthew John Benecke. Matthew, thank you for joining me on the Fireside Chat on the Call to Action podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
That's awesome. So, Matthew, tell me, first of all, I got to go back. So, define speculative fiction writer. Tell me just a little bit about that.
Sure. Speculative fiction is sort of an umbrella term that covers a bunch of different elements of, a bunch of different styles of writing. And when I first started to write my first book, when people would say, what's it about or what genre is it, I really didn't know how to answer them. And thankfully, another writer alerted me to speculative fiction. So speculative fiction pulls from a few different styles, like there's science fiction aspects, horror aspects, supernatural. It's kind of like a little bit of everything without really adhering to any one, in particular. And I felt like that really, I connected with that because I have a lot of different interests and brought those into my books. And it felt cool to have, sort of like a unifying title that I could work under.
Sounds good. Got it. Okay. Now, before we really get into the meat of the show, I like to do an icebreaker. So for you, I like to know, what is your superpower? So share that with us.
Sure. If I had to pick one superpower that I think I have, it would be probably closer to something like Professor X from the X-Men series, because I feel like one of my strongest passions is helping people and helping to teach people, helping others to either improve their skill set or introduce new ones. And I feel like I have a good ability to read people, to read their emotional state, and to understand them through conversation and just interacting with them. And I'd like to think that my superpower would be, either teaching or helping others. And that's something that I'm also extremely passionate about. So I think they go hand in hand.
Sounds like we have a lot in common, Matthew. I mean, I like to do that too. That's why I do the podcast. I do. I like to share. And then if it's something I can do to help somebody else, or, just to kind of help them along, maybe something that I wish I would have known, I like to share that kind of information. So
yeah, absolutely.
It makes me feel good. Yeah, and it makes me feel good too. I like doing that. So Matthew, thank you for sharing your superpower. And now I'd like to know more about what inspired you. So let's start with first, when did you know that you wanted to write?
Great question. I can actually tell you the specific date. It was April
Ooh.
1990. And the reason it was that day in particular was that was the first time I ever had something published. It was an awful poem I wrote in the first grade that we submitted to a local
Oh.
newspaper that I cringe looking at now. But at the time, it really served as the genesis of this passion that I have for writing. My biggest inspiration growing up, I guess, was my mom because she was an avid reader. She wound up working in our local library when I was a kid, so I was constantly surrounded by books and different different styles, different authors. So when that moment came in 1990, that was the first time I saw something I wrote in print, saw my name, and I remember, my family being excited and sharing it with each other, and there was just something that I don't know, that just clicked inside of me that something I created could be of interest to someone else. And that was really the germ of it, I guess. And
That's
then
awesome.
yeah, and then I lucked out that I had phenomenal teachers all throughout elementary school. And I remember Miss Michelle Shapiro DiBiase, Miss Elaine Noto, and Miss Nancy Mail in particular. Those three teachers really fostered that interest in creative writing. And I actually still have the lime neon green composition notebook that I had written all those stories in fifth grade. And it was great
Wow.
because again, I never really considered myself to be a creative person. I see some kids even now that they know that they want to be, painters or musicians or whatever. And I never really had that. Even with writing, it was just
Mhm.
sort of like an activity that I did in school, but there was just something that I connected with in terms of the storytelling. It was an opportunity to create, but also to, transport myself to anywhere I wanted to go. And that's what I loved about reading. Um, and so for me, writing was that creative outlet, but also an opportunity to give others the experience that I really loved from reading books, whether it was Stephen King or C.S. Lewis. I had a pretty broad interest in terms of the stories that I enjoyed reading, and so I think that really influenced my writing style and what I do now. So
That's
it
awesome.
all started in that first grade classroom. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
And I was going to say, and it's amazing how when you have really good teachers, that it makes such a difference. This is years later, and you're still recalling the names of the teachers that inspired you, like and encouraged you when you were younger. I think that is just amazing. Have you connected with them later in life, and have they seen your work?
I have, yeah, especially with my fourth grade teacher. I was able to connect with her through Facebook. One of the positive elements of social media, being able to reconnect with some of those teachers, and it was cool because she served as an inspiration in a number of ways. Like I was always a really shy, introverted kid, and in her fourth grade class, her big claim to fame in the school was she did the fourth grade play, and it was always like around, I guess, like a Disney theme or something to that effect, and she cast me in the lead. It was Beauty and the Beast, and I cannot tell you the
Oh.
terror that I had being cast in that role. But she really inspired me. Her belief in me really helped me to overcome a lot. And so being able to get up on that stage and perform, I mean, talk about wanting to be like a wallflower and shrinking back and being forced literally into the spotlight. It was such a great experience, and it really, helped propel me forward because the following year I was named the valedictorian of the school. And so I had to go and stand up in front of everybody and give a speech and do all that. And if it wasn't for, her belief in me and that experience in that play, I'm sure that would have been a nightmare experience too. But, my shift towards being an extrovert and being more comfortable with myself and interacting with others really started in that class and because of that play. So I owe her a lot in particular. So thanks, Miss DiBiase,
That
if you're
is so
listening.
cool. That is so cool, and it's just life-changing moments at that age, and then look at you now. You're like a published author. That
Yeah.
is so cool, and she gets to see that. I think for if I were a teacher, I would be probably as proud as your parents. I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, that is so cool."
Yeah, and it's funny, I wound up
That is
ultimately,
great.
before I shifted fully towards writing, I was in education. That was the field that I ultimately had, the professional drive to pursue. And part of the reason was wanting to give back, like knowing the impact that some teachers had on me, and knowing that I could bestow that on others, and really provide, if nothing other than like the confidence building that comes with that. Like so many of these people had that
Mhm.
belief in me, And that helped me to have that belief in myself. And I think, being able to connect with kids like that, that's what really inspired me to get into teaching. And then, through writing, I guess where I'm at now as a writer, especially, being involved in social media, you see it personally in the writing community, and all that. I feel like what
Mm-hmm.
I get out of it the most is helping others on their journeys, whether it's through writing advice or just a retweet, whatever it is, just helping them get their stuff out there. I get more out of that experience than I do, promoting myself, or even sharing my own work. So
Yeah, that is awesome. That's a beautiful story, actually. It really is. And speaking of the writing community, yes, we do see a lot of that. I do a lot of that too. Like, I'm not an author. I don't write any books. I don't have any plans to, but I love to support what you guys are doing. And you're just a fun bunch overall. I love being around creative people, and I feel like I'm creative myself. And so to be around peers like that, and with social media, you can connect with thousands of people, just at any moment. And you can get on there any time of the day. And you can connect with, people from the writing community, and someone's always posting something interesting, or they're bringing you along, introducing you to new people that they're working with or that are in their following list. So it helps you to really increase your network, and just really get to learn more about people too. So I think that's really cool.
absolutely.
Yeah. Which is how we connected,
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I felt
right?
that same innate connection to you, because you see, I mean, there are folks who are extremely self-interested, and that's their right. They can use their platforms and channels however they like. But when you encounter someone like you, who clearly is interested in the opposite, trying to uplift other people, that really resonated with me, and it does with plenty of others. And fortunately, there are many people that are like that. And those are the folks that I gravitate towards, because I think we kind of have that same mentality. That through
Yeah.
lifting up others, we lift ourselves up as well. So
Right. And thank you. Yes. And I actually thank you, because when you reached out, I think you reached out to me and asked what you could do for me. You're the only person that's ever done that.
oh wow, well
And
that's
yeah, really. And I was like, oh my gosh. It like really touched me. I was like, that is so cool. So I had to have you on the
no, I
show. It's like,
appreciate that.
definitely. Yes, definitely, definitely. So tell me more about your book, your series, Cosmogonia. So just share a little bit about that with the listeners.
Sure. So Cosmogonia started out from, I guess, an amassment of different influences. So when I was a kid, again, I was big into Stephen King, from a literary standpoint, but my interests were really varied. I was into music, television shows, movies, video games, especially Final Fantasy, things like that. And so little by little, I realized that these influences were sort of creating something within my imagination. And from personal experiences and things like that, I said, wow, it'd be really cool to do something with all of this, like try, I don't know, maybe to write a story. And so one day I sat down, and I had an idea for a beginning and an ending, and I said, oh, maybe I'll jot it down, get a couple of paragraphs out. And to make a long story short, that first book turned into something much longer than I anticipated, and ultimately became what should be a 5 novel series. And Cosmogonia itself is like the Greek derivative of the word cosmogony, which is the study
Hmm.
of the origins of the universe. And that was something that I was really fascinated with when I was in undergrad. I don't have a scientific background or anything like that. It was just, you know, I feel like it's something that unites everybody. Like every culture, every
Hmm.
religion has an origin story. And I thought,
Right.
wow, wouldn't it be
And
cool?
they're all very similar a lot of
Well,
times too,
that's
if you notice.
exactly, and that's what I found so
Yeah.
fascinating, is that no matter what culture, and really at any point in history, there's always, we've had this innate wonder about how everything began. And when you get to the scientific side of it, it gets really interesting, because you start talking about, like, if you're discussing like the Big Bang, you know you're talking about the beginning of time, and that engenders questions like, well, what happened before then? The beginning of
Hmm.
space, well, where was where before space existed? So those kinds of things really grasp my interest. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to kind of like, not merge, but like explore those kinds of concepts, but in a secular fashion, right? So ignoring like religion
Right.
or philosophy, any of that, and really just sort of coming up with a fictionalized version of that. And that was the driving force for the novel. And it really, I'm sure any other writer will tell you that when you start out with an idea, and really the best stories start to tell themselves. And so after grappling with that, with the writing of the first two books, I said I'm just going to let this go where it will, and it became something far more involved than I thought it would have been initially. So what starts out as like a simple story in The Lion in the Desert, prototypical good versus evil type of almost like adventure book, it
Mm-hmm.
really blossomed into something more interesting and intricate. I'd like to think, that explores things like that cosmogony and stuff like that. So
So real cool. So let me ask you a question. So are your books, is it more for like young adults, adults, teens? Like who did you write for with with this series?
sure. So the series, it's the audience itself, I'd say, probably skews a little more towards the adult side, just because of the nature of some of what gets explored. So the concepts and things
Okay.
like that. But I'm proud to say that I actually had my 9-year-old son. His is an avid reader, and he's really been developing his repertoire of books that he likes to enjoy. And so I decided to share my first book with him, so he read it and enjoyed it, which was cool. That was a neat experience
Oh,
as a dad,
good.
um,
Oh
but
yeah.
I think anybody, adolescents up to to adults for sure, would be like the target audience.
That's awesome. Wow. So do you have your books? They're on Amazon, right?
Yes. So they are on Amazon. Originally when I had this, so my dream originally was to be like a traditionally published author and to go for, the top of the New York Times bestsellers list. And that was something that that was the dream, like specifically concrete. Anything short of that would have been a failure. And what's funny is when I was in graduate school, one of the guys in my literature courses was a published writer. I mean, he wrote more than 3 dozen novelizations for Star Trek. He had some really
Wow.
impressive credentials to his credit. He would attend conferences with Stephen King. I mean, he was involved in the community that I hope to get involved in. And his advice right out of the gate was don't pursue like traditional publishing is not what it used to be. Consider independent publishing. And to that point, everyone had told me the opposite. There was almost like a stigma against being a self-published author. And, at that time, this was probably God, almost 15 years ago, I guess now, at that time, self-publishing was looked down upon because it showed, I don't know, a lack of patience, a lack of willingness to, to go through the process, if you will. And
Hmm.
in the past 15 years, the whole landscape has changed. Amazon's really offered up an opportunity for voices that might not have been heard to get their, their time to shine. And the
Right.
more I heard from people that I respected to pursue independent publishing, I gave it an opportunity. And honestly, for me at least, I've been so much happier in that pursuit, going the independent route, because it's given me more creative control. And as someone with varied interests and skill sets, it's something that I really enjoy. I design my own covers. I do the typesetting. It's something that I want the creative control over, because I can express myself in those ways too. So it's neat to be able to interact and have that degree of influence over my finished product.
You know what? That's the a common thread I've heard from other authors that are independent or self-published is the fact that they do get that creative control with their books and what they put in there. And I think that's cool. I think it's important. It's probably for me an entrepreneurial mindset because I work for myself. So being an entrepreneur, you're in control of what you do,
Mm,
and I'm a hands-on person, and I like that. And I think that it takes a certain mindset, and I think that when you're a self-published or independent author and having that control, it's your story. Who can tell you to take out or what's acceptable or what's not acceptable in something that you channeled as something that you wrote.
right, but you know what?
That's how I see it.
It's a double-edged sword though, and I understand why there is the stigma against it, because
Hmm.
I'm someone who is open to critical feedback, and I really take a lot of it to heart, because I understand that there's a need for other perspectives, right? But there are a lot, I would even say maybe almost a majority of independent writers who don't do that, who are afraid of that criticism, and so they do what they want, almost to their detriment, whereas I try to be more open
Without
to
getting
it.
that additional like feedback from your peers to say, hey, this sounds good, this doesn't sound good.
Right, exactly. And
Is that
also
what you're saying?
right,
Okay.
and some of them also lack, the experiential factor too, where, so I'm lucky. I do graphic design. Okay. Like I have an interest in photography. I've won, a few photo competitions and things like that. So when I'm putting a critical
Dude, you have
comment,
like more than one superpower, man. You're like Superman.
I try to spread it around too. Well, that's the thing, right? Like I said, as a kid, I didn't know that I didn't consider myself to be a creative person, but now as an adult, I'm a musician, a photographer, a writer. Like I need these creative outlets in ways that I never could have
Yeah.
anticipated. But the problem is that, for some people, they lack, I don't know, it's not the self-confidence, but they are afraid of being criticized and being corrected, or being shown a different way. And so they use the independent path to sort of just put their stuff out there as is. And I've been asked to
Mm.
review books and, to do things like that. And sometimes it's very difficult because, forget about typos and things like that. I mean, the writing itself is just not, it's really not ready to be published, and sometimes these books have already been out for months and months and months, and it's difficult to find, a balance between being honest with people and encouraging, when they don't want to hear the negatives. And that's the problem, where, you get a traditionally published author, they're vetted, right? They have an agent more often
Mm-hmm.
than not. There's a professional editing that's done, and that's something that's really, I don't know. That was why I didn't even want to get into independent publishing, was I was afraid, I'm like, well, people aren't going to take my work seriously because it's going to be paired against, other people who haven't gone through the same vetting process. But what is the phrase? The cream of the crop will rise to the top.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I figured. I said, you know what, if my work is worthy of being read and worthy of being shared, then it will, over time, it'll get there. And thankfully, it's been well received, and I feel like that's validated, my decision to go that way. And I think it's also too what your end results are. Some people want to be rich and famous. They want to be the next Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, or whoever, and want to be famous through their work. For me, this is an artistic expression. This is something like, hey, I think this is a cool idea, so I write for myself first, and then if anyone else enjoys it, that's a bonus for me. So it takes the sting out of criticism. If someone doesn't like it, that's okay, because that's their perspective. I wasn't trying to impress them or impress anybody. This was really done for me. So like I said, any positive that comes with it is like a bonus.
Matthew, thank you. Wow, you shared like some really good information. And so now I want to go more into advice. Like, what advice would you give to an upcoming or aspiring author?
Sure. So, I guess before we get started with that term aspiring author actually drives me nuts. And I see it all the time in the writing community. And the reason why is, it seems innocuous, right? But if you think about it, instead of being an aspiring author, I want people to want to be inspiring authors. Okay. And the thing with that phrase is, it really says, I want to do this, but I haven't yet started, or I want to do this thing and I'm afraid to start. There's connotations that come with it that I don't think people realize. And really the
Mm,
most difficult step is just getting started. You'd be surprised how many people I've spoken to that say, oh, I wish I could write a book, or, I've always dreamed of writing a book, and they haven't even, put their pen to paper or started typing at the keyboard, because really the most daunting thing to a writer is a blank page. That's the biggest, source of writer's block. And just getting started, as simple a step as it sounds, is the most difficult one, but doing it is really what gets the ball rolling. I've been fortunate enough to been taken on board, the advanced literate team, and that's, Taylor Vogt is another awesome member of the writing community, and he's given me an opportunity to write this article series that basically gives advice for up and coming writers, like going over just how to get started. um, and
Now, do you post this on Twitter? I hadn't seen that.
I do, yeah. So unfortunately, once, my schedule shifted a little bit in December, I
Uh,
haven't written the next article, but they're all linked on there. And the website would,
okay, I'll make sure I'll share
sure,
those.
yeah, it's advancedliterate.com. And if you go under, the authors there, you'll see my stuff. And I mean, everybody that has stuff up there is great. But what I've used my platform for is really to give more of, an educational background, and instructional stuff. Because the problem is, it's, again, the internet's a double-edged sword, right? There's just this surfeit of information out there, and it can be daunting for someone who's trying to start out. They don't really even know where to look or where to start. And some of the information's less than reputable. It can be difficult to get started. So I tried to serve as an anchor point, using my own personal anecdotes, like how I got started, the struggles that I went through, and the solutions that I found. Everyone's afraid of writer's block, and for me, I think the biggest source of writer's block is folks who are too self-critical. They're trying to edit as they're writing, for example, and really the
Mm-hmm.
best solution to that is just to write. Don't even think about it. Just let it go, and understand that there's a time to write and a time to edit, and it's not necessarily the same time. So I found that
Good.
really,
Okay.
that really works. But for aspiring writers, you know, there's there's so many steps that you can take, and those are things that I tried to explore in that article series, at the ongoing article series. And I got up to the point of pretty much getting started. You can be someone who plots out a book, and takes copious notes and gets everything set up, or really you could be, they call it a plotter or a pantser, right? So a plotter is someone that plots everything out, meticulous notes, and really has like a framework that they go through. And a pantser is someone who flies by the seat of their pants, right? They just sit down and type. And for me, I guess with most things, I find that I'm somewhere in the middle. Like, I like to have notes to have something to fall back on, but the absolute best writing that I've done really was when I just let the story lead me. And I found that out because I was struggling with my third novel, The Metamorphoses, to really like force it in this one direction. And no matter what I did, it just didn't feel right. It was laborious. It was an awful writing experience. And one day when I was out for a walk to clear my head, I just sort of let it go and just said, well, let me see what I can think of, and let's see what the story wants. And all of a sudden, all of the struggles I had disappeared, and I went back to the computer, and the story really did sort of tell itself from that point forward. So that's a really good approach to take from a writing standpoint. Um, the other bit of advice, though, and I'm fortunate that I come from a creative background, but also a business background. So my undergraduate degree is actually in finance. So I had, courses in marketing, courses in finance, and I'm able to sort of, I don't know, dabble in both realms. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's a big struggle for writers, whether they're established or not, in marketing themselves. It's understanding how to leverage your platforms, and really how to create meaningful content. Like you've seen it, I'm sure, in the writing community, where it's people that just constantly post about their books. I have a new book out, book, and that's not
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
that's a turnoff to people. I mean, and
Mm-hmm.
they just kind of feel lost in that. And I think we've discussed this before about, being genuine and having that authenticity. Like, it's more like the folks that I follow and interact with, I'm interested in the people. The work is great, and I'm sure the writing is awesome too, but I like interacting with them and learning more about their interests and how I can help them, you know, do what they love. And too many
Mm-hmm.
people get caught up in just, I don't know, what they think of as like the business side of it. And it's tough.
Yeah, I think the thing about social media and probably people's concept of marketing in general is that really you have to learn that, and I'm sure you know this, but people, they buy from people that they like. So if it's constant post about, hey, look at my stuff, look at my stuff, look at my stuff, we're not learning about you as a person. Why would I want to buy your book? What is it about
Exactly.
you that's right that I can connect with that would make me want to buy your book, or learn more about you? And but social media, like, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. You can use it to just keep pushing content out, or you can use it to connect with people. And I'm more into connecting with people,
Oh,
you
100%.
know. Yeah, I think it's better when it's done that way.
Well,
And I think too, oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead. It's okay.
Well, that's the thing, right? So social media, I think people forget the social part of it. Like for me, I actually enjoy, the in-person events more, right? And as an independent author, you know, it's really on me to set those things up, and I had done just as like a passion project. I had a beer blog that I've kept since I guess like 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, I said, oh, you know, it'd be cool to do, you know, like a beer book because it's something that I'm passionate about and people are interested in it. And I wound up doing a book tour. And what was funny was I set up, you know, I was able to get into all these different breweries and set up shop there and do book signings and stuff. And the best part of it to me was just interacting with people, you know, and whether they bought a book
Mm-hmm.
or not, the conversation was the best part for me. And the funny thing was, I sold. They let me have my fiction. You know, I had all of my books available, and I sold more fiction than I did nonfiction. And I didn't anticipate that. And I think a lot of that had to do with
Wow.
just, you know, interacting with people. And what's funny was, again, leveraging social media. When I finished that tour, you know, the problem is you don't know, you have to have stock on hand, right, if you're going to sell physical copies of the books, and that's a challenge for, you know, an independent author. So I had
Mm-hmm.
some stock left over at the end of the tour, and I really wasn't sure what to do with it. I didn't want to just have it sitting in my house. And someone alerted me to the Goodreads giveaway program, and I fell in love with, you know, the way they were running it back in 2017, where I was able to set up, I could
Mm-hmm.
kind of customize these giveaways for the books. And one of my dreams, as silly as it might sound, I said, wouldn't it be cool someday to say that I had a book, you know, that somebody on every continent read my books? Well, through the Goodreads program, I was able to, you know, sort of localize these giveaways. And I did one on literally on every continent. And what was really neat was, you know, I had winners in Asia and Africa, South America, and I sent the books all over the place.
That's
But what's funny
awesome.
was a few months later, I did it and I pretty much forgot about it. Well, a few months later, I got a message from someone in South Africa saying that he was a winner, he had read the book, and he loved the, you know, my work and what I was doing, you know, with my social media. And he invited me to join this global writers group. And I wound up meeting so many amazing people from South Africa in particular, just because of the fact that I did this giveaway, you know, and now I'm heavily involved
That's
with.
so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I have friends now, that people that I genuinely, you know, think of as friends from halfway around the world, who share the same interests as me, who are going through the same experiences, and it's all because of, you know, this guy Andrew Christie and his books and everything group on Facebook. You know, so that's one of the cool things about social media. You know, and I don't know, it just helped me to think in a more broad way about how to utilize social media and how to interact with people first, you know? So that was a cool experience.
Right. Wow, that is cool. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. That's awesome, Matthew. And it's the cool thing, another cool thing about the internet in general, you were able to do a giveaway, just like you said, for every continent. Someone in every continent has their book in your and has your book in their hand. And you made that awesome connection from the people that you met in South Africa. That is really cool.
Right. And that's the thing, right? It's differentiating. That's again, that comes from the business background, right? But it's, what is everybody doing and how can I do that same thing differently? Or where is there a gap in this marketing, you know, that I can kind of fill with a skill set that I have, you know, and I'm so lucky that my friend Howard Dunkley had alerted me to the Goodreads program, the Goodreads giveaways. And I said, oh, this is perfect. And then, you know, they did change it a few months later, so it's not exactly the same as it used to be, but still, it's an opportunity to connect directly with readers. You know, you get folks. I think that if there's one bit of advice I can give from a marketing standpoint, most writers that are starting out tend to start with their friends and family. They, you know, they get them on Facebook or on Twitter, and they use that. They think that they can build off of that as their readership base, but the problem is the generating of interest and building and proliferating, you know, followership, it really doesn't start from there. You really do have to start from, you know, folks who are interested in what you're doing specifically, you know. And that's where Goodreads comes into play, because it's a group of people who are interested in books, you know. So for a writer, it really is an unleveraged you know, resource that I think people can really explore to their benefit.
Right. Awesome. Wow. Thanks for sharing. That's such good info. And you're right. You're right. So, Matthew, this has been great. I've learned a lot. You shared some really, really good information. And I'm sure that the listeners are going to want to know how they can contact you. So, share with us your website, your social media, however ways that the listening audience can contact you. Can you share that with us, please?
Sure. So I use my primary website, MatthewJohnBenecke.com, www.MatthewJohnBenecke.com, as my primary resource of information. So there's links to all of my books there. I have some exciting new content that's coming up that I'll be posting there. I work with an author in Brooklyn, an artist in Brooklyn, and a photographer from Romania who actually works out of Transylvania, of all places, which is kind of cool. And we've
Really?
had some cool collaborations and different projects that we have. So I try to differentiate that media, and offer a bunch of different stuff. So if you go to my website, you'll find that stuff in the next couple of months, links to my books and links to all my social media pages. So on Twitter, especially, that's where I'm most active. But I also, I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and links to those accounts are available on that website. And Goodreads as well,
Awesome.
if you're into that. So.
All right, cool. Wow, this has been great. And Matthew, it's really, really been a pleasure having you as a guest on the Call to Action podcast. And I want to thank you just for being here and sharing really good information. And I learned a lot, and I'm sure that those who are listening learned a lot as well. And do you have any last words, like any final thing you want to share with the listeners?
Sure. Yeah. I'm living proof that if you have dreams and you put in the effort to see them through, that you can achieve them. There's nothing special about me. I'm no different than anybody else. If there is a difference, it's really just that I've tried to pursue those dreams. And I would encourage anybody who's on the fence, again, that if you're an aspiring writer, get to it. If you're an aspiring artist, whatever it happens to be, just take that first step, as terrifying as it might be, because that first step will almost certainly be followed by another and another, and that's really the exciting thing. We have such an opportunity in the society we live in to pursue these dreams and to make a mark for ourselves. And really, it's just getting started, is the biggest thing. So, and if I could be of any help to anybody, whether you're a writer or just anybody in general, I'm happy to help. So, and thank you, Shantae, for having me on and being as supportive as you are in the writing community and online.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I enjoy it. I think I get just as much joy out of doing it as you guys receive, I guess. It's just been really fun for me too.
Yeah, it's really cool. And, and we appreciate it
Yes.
shows. It definitely does. And this was a great fireside chat. I
Oh,
appreciate the opportunity to come on and spend some time with you here.
all right. Well, thank you. Thank you. All right. So, everyone, thank you for listening and stay tuned for more fireside chats on the Call to Action podcast and just keep moving forward. Until next time. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Call to Action podcast. Make sure to visit me on my blog at ctamarketing.biz. There, you can find articles for entrepreneurs and self-starters on tech and tips to help navigate this ever-changing world. Until next time.